morning, Emma. You know, I was so wrong about you. After all, it was just me who was the problem, you know? I made all these mistakes, and you were just showing me the way. I'm sorry, Emma. I'm glad that we can be together forever. What? Oh, wait a minute. Let's see this. This might go. Yeah, at least a couple more hours. Hey guys, and welcome to this week's episode of Pauper Ponderings. Now, before we get into Quicksilver Storm, which I'm sure you're very anxious to see, we have a little bit of awarding to do. And that is award our Tournament of Champions winner. And who is that? Let's get like a drum roll going here. I can maybe add something in there that probably sound a lot better. Alright, drum roll. The champion of the very first Pauper Ponderings Tournament of Champions is Goblin Storm. I went back, I counted all of the different, or all of the comments, all of the people who said which deck they liked the most, and in a pretty close matchup, Goblin Storm was our champion. So congratulations to Goblin Storm. Thank you for everyone who commented. Thank you to everyone who participated in this tournament. I had a lot of fun. I'll probably be doing one, you know, in the not-so-distant future, I would say, with 4 other decks, and then, you know, maybe we'll have a Tournament of Champions, or something like that. But, without further ado, let's get into some Quicksilver Storm. I'm really excited about this deck this week, so let's... Alright, so, this is the deck list. Quicksilver Storm, named after the card Quicksilver Dagger. So this is 1 blue and a red for an enchantment aura, and it gives the enchanted creature tap. This creature deals 1 damage to target player, and you draw a card. So, what we're trying to do is either put the Quicksilver Dagger onto the Zephyr Scribe, which is 2 and a blue for a 2/1, and it has blue and tap, draw a card, then discard a card, and then whenever you... But the important thing is, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you untap Zephyr Scribe. And Thermo-alchemist, which is 1 and red for an 0/3 with Defender. You can tap to deal damage to each opponent, but whenever you cast instant or sorcery, you untap Thermo-alchemist. So, what we're looking to do is get either 1 or 2 of these into play, and then start looping these very cheap instants and sorcery. So we have 4 copies of Gitaxian Probe, 4 copies of Gutshot, 4 copies of Expedite to give our creatures haste, 4 copies of Needle Drop to keep us going, and then 4 copies of Rite of Flame in the 1-drop slot. So these are all going to work towards getting our creatures to keep being able to untap and untap and untap. We also have a Desperate Ritual in here because it kind of works with our Spiraling Embers and, with our Spiraling Embers, I should say, and it's just another ritual, and unfortunately the deck list that got submitted to me only had 59 cards, so we added this Desperate Ritual. 4 copies of Manamorphose, basically filling the exact same spot as Gitaxian Probe in this deck. And then we have 3 copies of Inner Fire, which is 3 in a red. You can it adds a red mana to your mana pool for each card in your hand. And then we have 2 copies of Spiraling Embers, which is 3 in a red for a sorcery, and it deals damage to target creature or player equal to the number of cards in your hand. So we're going to get a bunch of cards in our hand, and we can possibly finish the game with Spiraling Embers. The final card in the deck is Rolling Thunder. Again, we're going to start to make a decent amount of mana. We draw a bunch of Inner Fires, and funny enough, the deck list that got sent to me was this was a Fireball, and unfortunately, a Fireball is not legal in Pauper. I thought about Carvex Torch, but I think actually Rolling Thunder might be better. There might be spots where we want to spread the damage around, so that's why we played Rolling Thunder over Carvex Torch or Fireball. But yeah, I think this deck is going to be pretty sweet. It does a lot of really cool things. This deck is very similar to something like Goblin Storm, where when we start to get going, things are going to get, you know, pretty fast and pretty crazy. Over in the sideboard, it's basically your blue and red kind of good stuff sideboard. We have 3 copies of Electrickery, 4 copies of Pyroblast, 3 copies of Dispel, 2 copies of Echoing Truth, and 3 copies of Relic of Progenitus. So, pretty stock sideboard, but this deck, I'm pretty excited. We might be a little bit fragile. That's creator Dylan, who sent this to me. Again, thank you, Dylan, for sending me this list. He said the deck is a little bit fragile, so we're going to test it out. We're going to see how it goes, and yeah, we're going to see. I think there's a lot of power here, and I'm excited to see where this deck heads. So, we'll be back for round 1 in just a little bit. Alright, so in game 1, we end up keeping 6. We have a hand that, you know, looks okay. We have some lands we can cast Zephyr Scribe, and we quickly realize that Inner Fire is terrible. This card, we've played it before in the past. This card just is abysmal. But we'll let the game continue to play out. On the end of his turn, we cycle this Ash Barrens, go and get a mountain. And this is kind of an interesting decision here for us. We end up playing the Zephyr Scribe because we figure, you know, if he has something, he has something, but we're really not doing anything, just waiting for him to kill us. So we end up starting to use the Zephyr Scribe to draw a card and discard a card. That is its ability here. You see it's blue tap, draw a card, and then discard a card, and when we recast non-creature spell, it untaps. So we go ahead and do that. We have 3 red mana. We use it, cast a Manamorphose. Untap it again, draw another card, find a Thermo-alchemist, which is pretty good. We're able to cast the Thermo-alchemist, and we just pass the turn. Our opponent's turn, he casts another Firebrand Archers. And then on our turn, deal him 1. We get to draw and discard, find an Expedite. Expedite untaps both of our creatures. We draw a card. Turns out to be a gut shot, which is quite decent. We gut shot, and then we find another gut shot, which is actually insane. So with the 2 gut shots, we're able to actually take down both the Firebrand Archers. And our opponent had seen enough, so off to game number 2. As we were going to gut shot his other Firebrand Archers, and yeah, that would have been pretty much the game for him. Game 2, we don't keep that hand, can't keep this 6, unfortunately. We end up keeping this 7, leaving the Ash Barrens on top. He starts off with a Lava Spike, and we start off with a Rite of Flame into a Thermo-alchemist, which seems to be a pretty decent play. But he has the turn 2 Searing Blaze, which is quite bad for us. We then go ahead and cast our other Thermo-alchemist here. He untaps. We're at 14 already from the Lava Spike and the Searing Blaze. He cycles 2 Forgotten Caves and passes the turn. We find an Expedite, we deal him with damage, we untap. We then find a Needle Drop and ship the turn. On his turn, he Lava Spikes us and Lava Spikes us, so we're at 8. The end of his turn, we end up dealing him with damage with Thermo-alchemist, untap. Deal him another damage down to 17, Needle Drop him. Don't draw anything of relevance and pass. We're at 8, our opponent Lightning Bolts us, and then Chain Lightnings us, and Fire Blasts us. So just as basically a quick game as game number 1. So for game number 3, we're on the play. We end up keeping this hand just based on the fact that we have a lot of lands with a Thermo-alchemist and a Dispel backup, and we kind of want to play it a little bit slower. Our opponent plays a mountain. So this turn, this was definitely an interesting turn for us. So here, we have the option of casting the Rite of Flame into the Thermo-alchemist with the Dispel, but then we're basically done. Like, if he has 2 removal spells, this game is over. But what I should have realized was that, like, the game's over either way. So I don't do that. I wait the extra turn for him to cast the Firebrand Archer. So then we untap, and we cast ourselves a Thermo-alchemist and pass. So here, again, if he has the double removal spell, this game's basically over anyways. So he tries to Shard Volley. This I'm kind of happy about, because if it's Shard Volley, he most likely doesn't have another removal spell. So I'm pretty happy about that. He does deal us a damage. He attacks us here. The reason I don't block is because if he has a Needle Drop, this is just a complete blowout. And he drops down a Curse of the Pierce Heart, which deals us another damage. And another damage on our upkeep. So here's the this is an interesting part of, this is the game essentially right here. So we draw another Manamorphose, draw another card, and here we draw Quicksilver Dagger and put it on the stack, immediately targeting a Thermo-alchemist. And here our opponent went into the tank, and this is kind of where I wished that I would have had this live, because we get absolutely destroyed by this Pyroblast here. Puts us down to 14 from the Firebrand Archer, and now we're on basically nothing. And, well, the game unfortunately ends a couple turns later. We get needle dropped, we get now to 9, draw an island. There's another Curse of the Pierced Heart, deals us 1 down to 8, taxes down to 6, we go down to 4 on our upkeep. Draw out an Ash Barrens and concede the game pretty much. He has something here, needle drop, and that finishes us off, unfortunately. So off to round number 2. Hopefully we can get a little bit of a better start. But yeah, this deck is pretty cool. It's doing some sweet stuff. I'm just not sure of the power level at this point. Alright, so in this game we end up keeping this hand because we can cast the Zephyr Scribe. We end up playing against Boggle, so he has a turn 1 Glade Cover Scout. We have to pass. He has a turn 2 Utopia Sprawl into attack for 1, and then we cast our Zephyr Scribe. So here I'm actually feeling okay about this game. Like, he's going to have the Armadillo Cloak here, and we end up taking 3 down to 16. But in our perfect world, we get to Quicksilver Dagger, and, you know, barring something bad, we get to essentially go off next turn. So on his turn, he unfortunately lays down the Cartouche of Strength, which completely blows us out. We get to deal him a couple damage and draw a couple more cards, but this unfortunately is basically the game for us. As we're left with basically a lot of fluff in our hand and not a lot of substance. He makes a 4/4, he attacks us down to 12. Himself up to 29. We draw an Inner Flame and basically pack it in there. There's nothing really we can draw to really ever get back into this game. So for game number 2, we end up keeping a pretty kind of narrow hand, but we have an Echoing Truth, which is good. We boarded in the Echoing Truths and the Electrickeries, and we boarded out the Inner Flames and Spiraling Destruction or whatever, Spiraling Embers, something like that. His hand is kind of slow in this game, but we don't really draw anything, so we think about Gut Shot plus Needle Drop, but that's just so inefficient. We end up doing it, trying to find that land. We do find it. We do get the island. We pass the turn. He has a Crimson Acolyte, which, if you're not familiar with this card, it's 1 and a white for a 1/1 with protection from red, and you can pay 1 white to give target creature protection from red until end of turn. Very good against Electrickery, obviously. So we take 1, play Mountain, and just can pass the turn. We figure we're not on too much of a clock, so we can take it a little bit slowly. We end up taking 4 there. We draw Spiraling Embers. Oh, that's right. We boarded out the Rolling Thunders. So there's the Ancestral Mask. This, we actually kind of get him here. We get to Echoing Truth, his Crimson Acolyte, and then that actually gets rid of both the Ancestral Mask and the Armadillo Cloak. We do take 1 down to 10, but still, unfortunately, cannot find a creature. He replays the Crimson Acolyte. We take 1 down to 9. Another Manamorphose. This is kind of the spot where we just kind of start. Figured I maybe should have went more all in on the Manamorphoses there, but it's pretty rough in this spot, especially us going down to 5 here. Because the gut shots are essentially turned off. That's kind of the rough thing about the gut shots, right? If we're getting pressured by these 2 creatures, the gut shots really cost us 2 life, because if this deck is going off, we don't want to spend any mana on them. So we cast another Manamorphose, we draw another card, cast a Needle Drop, another Manamorphose. Finally find a Thermo-alchemist, but at this point, it's a little bit too late. He casts an Armadillo Cloak, which makes us block, and then there's no real way we can get back into this game, unfortunately. So we go down to the Boggle Menace 0 and 2. A little bit of a shot back to reality after basically going 3-0 4 weeks in a row before this. But yeah, let's see if we can get a win in round number 3. Alright, so game number 1, we were on the play again. We ended up having to mold of 5 cards, but we keep this hand. We have a Gitaxian Probe. He goes Evolving Wilds into Island. we Gitaxian Probe him. Oh, and see a hand of a bunch of Thought Scours and Gurmag Anglers. He goes Thought Scour and passes. We just play out the Zephyr Scribe. And pass, he Brainstorms, and then Thought Scours, and then cast Gurmag Angler. And this gives us the spot to resolve our Quicksilver Dagger, which we go ahead and do. We're able to deal him with damage and draw a card. We gut shot him, draw a card. We Gitaxian Probe him again. We see Counterspell, Deprive, Grim Harvest Ponder. So we know our time is pretty limited. We want to get as many chip shots in as we can. And that's kind of what we do here. And I maybe use my life total a little bit too much, but like we really kind of needed to get as much value out of this situation as we could. There, I think maybe it would have made more sense to play the Thermo-alchemist, and that's kind of maybe where we ended up losing the game. So he has the Ponder here, and is able to find a Disfigure, which is really bad for us. But we do have, he does have the shields down. So we actually come fairly close to winning this game. We're actually able to play double Thermo-alchemist. Like so. So here we have the double Thermo-alchemist, which a decent amount of spells in hand, including this Inner Fire, which is just terrible, as usual. He attacks us, we have to block. So here we draw a Needle Drop. So we deal with damage with Thermo-alchemist, we cast the Needle Drop, we untap. Draw an Expedite. Now, all along, we know he has the Deprive. So we're kind of just waiting for him to counter something. And we actually get ridiculously close here. I'm not sure that I missed a point even. I just think that we maybe just got a little bit unlucky drawing double Inner Fire. But as you can see, he doesn't counter any of the draw ones. And I think on his side, even countering this Expedite here probably would have made a lot of sense. On tap, we put him all in on a 2-draw Quicksilver Dagger, and he decides to counter the Quicksilver Dagger. If that was any other spell, we actually win the game, but unfortunately we can't cast Inner Fire, and the Quicksilver Dagger does not untap the Thermo-alchemist, so we are defeated, unfortunately. We play out this turn because if his Delver doesn't flip, which it does not, and we can actually draw Gut Shot, but we realize he has double Deprive in hand, so we are defeated. So on to game number 2. Alright, so for game number 2, this game definitely takes a bit of a different situation. We Gitaxian Probe him to see just a bunch of counter spells. He plays a Dismal Backwater. So at this spot, we think about casting the Thermo-alchemist, but again, if we cast it, it just gets Doombladed because we saw a Doomblade in his hand. So we're kind of left to basically do nothing. And here was really where we messed up, unfortunately. So here, we cast the Gitaxian Probe, and we see a hand of a bunch of counterspells and removal spells. What we should have done is just cast the Thermo-alchemist here, got in, played the Expedite, dealt him a decent amount of damage. But unfortunately for us, that was pretty much it, as he kind of just locks the game up from here, as we're kind of stuck with a bunch of nonsense in our hand that really doesn't do anything. He just attacks us for 2, attacks us for 2. We really don't have anything of substance to play. 12. Get an island, but he ends up casting a Assault Eye Scavenger, gets us down to 10. Plays a mountain. We don't really have anything. He puts us down to 5. We take a draw. We play the Thermo-alchemist. We know it's going to get countered. And I just don't think there was a route in this game for us to win. Like, Quicksilver Dagger is just not a very good card in the face of it. And we'll obviously talk about that more in the conclusion, but definitely tough. We played against 3 really strong decks this weekend, and it definitely showed us. Our cards definitely got outclassed in pretty much every single game. But I'll talk about the conclusion, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll be back in just a little bit. Well, guys, like I said in the at the end of match number 2, this was definitely a humbling for us here at Pauper Ponderings. We spent 4 weeks in a row very rarely losing a game, and this week we were definitely a little bit outclassed. This deck does do some things fairly powerfully. The Thermo-alchemist is a good card, and we see it played in the mono red decks alongside Thornbow Archers because of, you know, the way to turn damage out of nothing, essentially. But when you're playing it alongside cards like Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning, those cards are, you know, 1 mana deal 4 instead of 1 mana deal 3. So you're kind of just adding a little bit, adding a little bit, adding a little bit. When you add it to cards like, you know, Expedite and Gutshot, you know, Gutshot is the best example here. We're paying 2 life to deal them 1 damage. With a Thermoalchemist in play, this thing turns into, you know, pay 2 life, deal them 2 damage. And that's not a really good rate most of the time. Gitaxian Probe is fine because you're drawing a card, and Expedite, you know, Expedite, another good example. What are you looking to draw into? You're looking to draw into more cards that, you know, either deal them 1 damage or are going to draw you a card. So I think the idea is kind of nice. Just in practice, it's just a little bit too underpowered. Also, Inner Fire. This card is terrible. This card is so bad. And I like saw it in the list that Dylan sent me. And no offense to Dylan, this is a really cool deck, and he said he had some success with it. The Inner Fires just can't be right. I think you want more, even cards like Mutagenic Growth or like any sort of free spells are probably better than this nonsense card. Spiraling Embers as well. I never really felt like I had a lot of cards in hand, and obviously we weren't able to get our combo off. And our combo really, you know, isn't that impressive because we're using it, drawing a card, discarding a card. We're never going to have a lot of cards in our hand, you know, where something like the Goblin Storm deck, that deck gets a lot of cards in his hand because of a card like Distant Melody. Spiraling Embers doesn't really work when you're essentially a cycling deck. And also, we never really generate that much mana, so the Rolling Thunder plan also did not seem to really come together. I think there are some powerful things here, and it is tough to not have powerful things happen. We're playing, you know, Gutshot and Manamorphose and Needle Drop. These are some of the most efficient spells in the format. It's just, I think the payoffs are a little bit too low with this deck, and I don't know if you want to abandon the idea altogether, but I think something like just a blue-red kind of control deck with Thermo-alchemist and some counterspells might be a better route than the Quicksilver Dagger plan, as nice as it does sound. So thanks for watching, guys. I do appreciate everyone watching, everyone commenting, everyone liking, that kind of thing. Again, I chose to do the recorded videos because the games were a bit of a slog. We did definitely got beat around a little bit, and I wanted you to kind of spare the I guess what's that meme or whatever. It's like, quit kicking him, he's already dead, or whatever it is. That's kind of what I felt like this week. But thanks for watching anyways, guys. I'll be back next week. Hopefully you enjoyed my First Impressions Dominaria video I did earlier this week. I'm going to be doing more of those, you know, just kind of random videos that I feel like making. But hopefully you enjoy this. Hopefully you have a great weekend, and I will see you next week with hopefully a deck that we can get a win out of. But yeah, thanks again, guys, and we'll see you next week.